Solaris 1972 wasn't just another science fiction film. It was Andrei Tarkovsky's 3-hour meditation on memory and grief that drove Soviet censors insane.
I don't remember this from the first time I watched it, but when I saw it recently, I was like, such a bitch!
The author hated it so much he publicly condemned the director. Filming in an actual chemical plant poisoned the crew, and the ending they released wasn't the ending Tarkovsky wanted. These are 16 facts about the philosophical masterpiece that rejected everything Hollywood taught about science fiction. Stanislaw Lem hated the film and called it a betrayal of his novel. Polish author Stanislaw Lem wrote the source novel exploring humanity's inability to comprehend alien intelligence. When Andrei Tarkovsky adapted it, he eliminated most of Lem's scientific speculation and focused entirely on the psychologist Chris Kelvin's guilt over his dead wife. Lem watched the finished film and was furious. He publicly condemned it as crime and punishment set in space that completely missed his point about alien contact. Lem complained Tarkovsky turned his philosophical science fiction into a domestic melodrama about marriage. The two men never reconciled. Lem refused to discuss the film positively for the rest of his life. He called it one of the most unpleasant experiences of his career. Tarkovsky ignored Lem's criticism, believing film required different approaches than literature. Soviet censors demanded Tarkovsky add futuristic elements he didn't want. Andrei Tarkovsky wanted Solaris to look timeless and avoid typical science fiction aesthetics. He deliberately designed spacecraft interiors to look worn and ordinary rather than futuristic. Soviet Film Committee Goskino watched early footage and rejected it. They demanded proper science fiction with advanced technology and futuristic design. Tarkovsky was forced to add scenes he considered unnecessary. He shot the extended Tokyo highway sequence showing future Earth purely to satisfy censors. The sequence features elevated highways and modern architecture Tarkovsky found meaningless. He included it reluctantly under threat of production cancellation. Tarkovsky later called these additions compromises that weakened the film. The Tokyo footage totals nearly 10 minutes of the film's runtime. Tarkovsky never forgave Goskino for forcing his hand. He believed their interference damaged his artistic vision. The space station was actually a decommissioned chemical plant that poisoned the crew. The Solaris space station interiors were filmed inside an abandoned chemical factory outside Moscow. The facility had produced synthetic materials until closing years earlier. Toxic chemical residue remained throughout the building. The production didn't properly test for environmental hazards before filming. Cast and crew began experiencing severe headaches, nausea, and respiratory problems within days. Multiple people were hospitalized during the 6-week location shoot. Actress Natalia Bondarchuk, who played Hari, developed chronic health problems she attributed to chemical exposure. Tarkovsky himself suffered lung damage that plagued him for years. Some crew members believe this exposure contributed to Tarkovsky's eventual death from lung cancer in 1986. The chemical plant's corroded, decaying appearance perfectly suited Tarkovsky's aesthetic vision, but came at severe health costs to everyone involved. The film's 3-hour runtime caused Soviet distributors to demand cuts. Tarkovsky's original cut ran 169 minutes, nearly 3 hours. Soviet Distribution Committee Sovexport Film demanded significant cuts for theatrical release. They believed Soviet audiences wouldn't sit through such a long, slow film. Tarkovsky refused to cut anything substantial. He argued every scene was essential to the film's philosophical development. After months of arguments, Tarkovsky agreed to trim approximately 12 minutes of footage. Even the shortened version ran 157 minutes, still extremely long for commercial cinema. Soviet theaters complained that the length limited daily screenings and reduced ticket sales. Despite the runtime, Solaris became surprisingly popular with Soviet audiences. The philosophical depth resonated with viewers tired of superficial entertainment. The original longer cut was never released and may be lost. Anatoly Solzhenitsyn was dying of cancer. Throughout filming, actor Anatoly Solzhenitsyn played the scientist Sartorius and was suffering from terminal lung cancer during production. He'd been diagnosed months before filming began, but didn't tell Tarkovsky. Solzhenitsyn was in constant pain and often required medical attention between takes. Other cast members noticed his deteriorating condition, but said nothing out of respect. Solzhenitsyn insisted on completing his role despite his illness. He believed working with Tarkovsky was too important to abandon. His gaunt appearance and haunted expressions in the film were partially genuine suffering. Solzhenitsyn completed Solaris, but died 2 years later in 1974 at age 47. Tarkovsky was devastated when he learned Solzhenitsyn had been dying during filming. He felt guilty for not knowing his actor's condition. Solzhenitsyn's performance remains one of the film's most powerful elements. Tarkovsky fought constantly with cinematographer Vadim Yusov. Over-visual style cinematographer Vadim Yusov had worked with Tarkovsky on previous films, including Andrei Rublev. During Solaris, their creative relationship collapsed completely. Tarkovsky wanted extremely long takes with minimal camera movement. Yusov believed this approach was boring and preferred more dynamic cinematography. They argued daily on set about shot composition and camera placement. Tarkovsky insisted on his vision. Yusov felt his artistic input was being ignored. The tension became so severe that crew members had to mediate their arguments. After Solaris, Yusov refused to work with Tarkovsky again. Their professional partnership ended permanently. Tarkovsky hired a new cinematographer for all subsequent films. Despite their conflict, Solaris' cinematography is stunning. The beautiful imagery came from two artists who couldn't stand each other, creating reluctant masterpiece together. The levitation scene required 43 takes over 5 days. The famous weightless levitation scene showing Chris and Hari floating through the space station required elaborate practical effects. The actors were suspended on nearly invisible wires while the camera rotated around them. Creating convincing zero gravity was extraordinarily difficult with 1970s technology. Tarkovsky demanded perfection. He rejected take after take for minor imperfections. The sequence required 43 separate attempts over 5 consecutive shooting days. Actors Donatas Banionis and Natalia Bondarchuk hung suspended for hours in uncomfortable harnesses. Both developed severe back pain from the prolonged suspension. The crew grew frustrated with Tarkovsky's perfectionism. The final version uses approximately 90 seconds of footage that required 5 days to achieve. Tarkovsky considered it essential to the film's dreamlike atmosphere. The suffering was justified by results. Eduard Artemyev's electronic score was added against Tarkovsky's wishes. Composer Eduard Artemyev created Solaris's distinctive electronic soundtrack using Soviet-made synthesizers. However, Tarkovsky originally wanted no musical score whatsoever. He believed music manipulated emotions and preferred pure ambient sound. Goskino insisted the film needed music to maintain audience engagement during long, silent sequences. Tarkovsky reluctantly allowed Artemyev to compose a score. He gave Artemyev minimal direction and limited his involvement. Artemyev created haunting electronic compositions that perfectly complemented the film's atmosphere. Tarkovsky grudgingly admitted the music improved certain scenes. However, he still preferred his original vision of complete silence. The score uses Bach's chorale prelude, which Tarkovsky did approve. The electronic portions were Artemyev's independent choices. Despite Tarkovsky's resistance, Artemyev's score became integral to the film's identity. Modern audiences cannot imagine Solaris without it. If you're enjoying these behind-the-scenes secrets about classic science fiction cinema, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our next deep dive. We've got more shocking production stories coming soon. Now back to Tarkovsky's haunting meditation on memory. The film was deliberately made as Soviet answer to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Soviet authorities commissioned Solaris specifically to compete with Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. They wanted their own prestigious science fiction masterpiece. Goskino believed Soviet cinema needed to demonstrate intellectual superiority over Western filmmaking. They chose Tarkovsky because of his artistic reputation. However, Tarkovsky deliberately rejected everything that made 2001 successful. Where Kubrick emphasized visual spectacle and technical achievement, Tarkovsky focused on psychological drama and philosophical questions. Where Kubrick showed futuristic technology, Tarkovsky showed decay and deterioration. Tarkovsky viewed 2001 as cold and sterile. He wanted Solaris to be warm and human. Soviet authorities were initially disappointed that Solaris looked nothing like 2001. However, the film's critical success eventually satisfied them. Tarkovsky had created the anti-2001 and proven his artistic independence. Natalia Bondarchuk's performance. Was her film debut at age 22, actress Natalia Bondarchuk was cast as Hari despite having no professional film experience. She was 22 years old and had only performed in student theater. Tarkovsky chose her specifically because of her inexperience. He wanted genuine naivety and vulnerability rather than trained. Acting technique. Bondarchuk was terrified throughout production. She had no idea how to perform for camera. Tarkovsky provided minimal direction, preferring to capture authentic uncertainty. Bondarchuk's genuine confusion and fear enhanced her performance as the resurrected wife who doesn't understand her own existence. Critics praised her emotionally raw portrayal. Bondarchuk later became a successful director herself. She credited Tarkovsky with teaching her filmmaking through deliberate neglect. His unconventional approach created authentic performance impossible to achieve through traditional acting methods. The underwater seaweed library scene was filmed in an actual submerged building. The haunting sequence showing the space station's flooded library with seaweed floating everywhere was filmed inside an actual partially submerged building. Production found an abandoned structure with a flooded basement outside Moscow. Rather than build elaborate sets, they simply added more water and real seaweed. The location was dangerous with unstable floors and contaminated water. Actors waded through genuinely filthy water containing unknown substances. Several cast members developed infections from exposure to the polluted water. The seaweed was real vegetation that began rotting during the multi-day shoot. The smell became unbearable. Donatas Banionis spoke no Russian and learned his lines. Phonetically Lithuanian actor Donatas Banionis played protagonist Chris Kelvin despite speaking virtually no Russian. He was a major star in Lithuania, but had performed primarily in Lithuanian language. Tarkovsky wanted him specifically for his expressive face and physical presence. Banionis learned his extensive Russian dialogue phonetically without understanding what he was saying. He memorized sounds rather than meanings. This created enormous difficulties during emotional scenes. Banionis couldn't naturally modulate his delivery because he didn't comprehend the words. Tarkovsky worked patiently with him, demonstrating emotional tones. Other actors found it frustrating performing opposite someone who didn't understand the language. Despite this handicap, Banionis delivered a powerful performance. The film was banned from Cannes. Film festival for 3 years, Solaris won the Grand Prix at the 1972 Cannes Film Festival, tied with the Maté affair. However, Soviet authorities then banned Tarkovsky from attending Cannes for the next 3 years. Goskino punished him for making statements about artistic freedom during the festival. Tarkovsky had criticized Soviet censorship in interviews with Western press. Soviet authorities viewed this as betrayal. They prohibited him from traveling internationally and restricted his future projects. The ban devastated Tarkovsky, who valued international recognition. He was forbidden from receiving his Cannes Award in person. The restriction lasted until 1975, when political circumstances changed. The mirror maze sequence was accidentally created when original set collapsed. The disorienting mirror corridor sequence where Hari walks through reflective surfaces wasn't originally planned. Tarkovsky had designed a different scene for that location. During construction, the set partially collapsed, destroying the planned design. With limited budget and time, Tarkovsky couldn't rebuild it. He improvised using mirrors and reflective materials available on short notice. The accident forced creative solution. Tarkovsky arranged mirrors to create infinite reflections and spatial confusion. The improvised sequence became one of the film's most visually striking moments. It perfectly represented Hari's psychological fragmentation and identity crisis. Tarkovsky later claimed the accident improved the film significantly. Alternate ending. Tarkovsky filmed a different ending, showing Chris definitively returning to Earth rather than the ambiguous island within station conclusion. The deleted version showed Chris landing on Earth and reuniting with his father in an unambiguous reality. They embrace, and Chris explains his experiences. The father accepts him despite everything. This ending provided clear resolution rather than philosophical uncertainty. Test audiences preferred the definitive ending. However, Tarkovsky fought to use the ambiguous version where viewers cannot determine if Chris is truly home or still trapped in Solaris' simulation. Goskino initially demanded the clear ending. Tarkovsky threatened to remove his name from the film. The censors eventually relented. Solaris could have been the Soviet 2001, A Space Odyssey, with spectacular effects and optimistic futurism. Instead, Andrei Tarkovsky created a 3-hour meditation on grief that poisoned his crew, enraged its author, and defied every expectation. The clear ending was cut. The author condemned it. And Soviet censors never understood what they'd approved. Some masterpieces succeed by rejecting everything expected.